The steam hit Gemma Hollis directly in the face. It billowed up from the battered oven door in a white, furious cloud, and Gemma stumbled back 2 steps, knocked her elbow into the corner of the prep table, and said a word that had absolutely no place in a Michelin-starred kitchen. Bernard. She pointed the oven mitt at the ancient unit in the corner of the pastry station, the one with the crooked handle and the temperature dial someone had labeled in permanent marker back when the original display had given up the ghost. "I know you did that on purpose." The oven gave a low, rattling hiss from somewhere deep in its ventilation. "Don't even." Gemma set both hands on her hips. Her chef's coat had a new steam stain on the collar. Her updo was already a disaster from the 6 a.m. prep she'd started alone because the overnight dishwasher had called in sick and someone had to reset the kitchen. "It is 7:43 in the morning. I have not finished my coffee, and the Michelin inspector may or may not be walking into this restaurant sometime in the next 2 weeks. So you will cooperate, or so help me I will get the repair quote and actually follow through this time." From the other side of the pass, Hector, the junior line cook who had been chopping shallots and pretending not to listen, cleared his throat. "You know that's an oven, right, chef?" "Of course I know it's an oven." Gemma turned back to her workstation. "And Bernard knows I know. That's the whole point." Hector went back to his shallots. After 2 years at Cormorant, he had learned that Gemma Hollis talking to Bernard was about as remarkable as the sun coming up. It just happened, and things still ran fine, and at some point you stopped asking why. Cormorant occupied a narrow brownstone on East 54th Street and operated on the combined anxieties of 41 covers a night, a wine list that required a sommelier with a separate master's degree, and one executive chef who took credit for a pastry program he had not touched personally since the previous spring. That executive chef was Stuart Pruitt. Stuart arrived each morning at 9:15, which was roughly 2 hours after Gemma had already prepped the station, recalibrated Bernard, sourced a substitute ingredient when a supplier fell through, and handled whatever small catastrophe the night shift had left behind. He wore his toque at a specific angle. He spoke to investors and food critics with great warmth and a lot of hand gestures. He referred to his tasting menu in interviews, which was charming because he had not written a single course of it. Gemma knew this. The rest of the kitchen knew this. The waitstaff knew this. And every so often, a particularly observant regular guest knew this too, because when Stuart held court at a table to explain the inspiration behind the lavender honey tart, he sometimes got the inspiration wrong, and Gemma would catch it from across the room and simply smile and look at the floor. She had worked at Cormorant for 6 years. She was 31 years old. She had a James Beard-nominated dessert on the menu that was attributed to the kitchen collectively, which was the kind of thing that made people say that's how it goes and shrug, and which made Gemma set her jaw and go talk to Bernard. The new prep guy started on a Wednesday. He showed up 5 minutes before the morning brief, which already put him ahead of 2 people on the line. He was wearing a kitchen uniform that fit like he had bought it 2 days ago and not yet broken it in. And he had the kind of hands that suggested he had done actual physical work at some point in his life, but maybe not specifically kitchen work. He was also significantly more attentive during Gemma's station walkthrough than anyone had been in recent memory. His name was Wyatt. He gave no last name, or if he did, it went past Gemma in the chaos of the morning brief. "You're on pastry prep," she told him, because Hector had a hand injury and she needed a body. "You'll follow my instructions exactly. Do you have any experience with tempered chocolate?" "Some," said Wyatt. He had more than some. He also said almost nothing while he worked, but he watched everything. The trouble started on a Thursday. It was the kind of Thursday that begins wrong. Delivery running 40 minutes late, a burn on a prep cook's wrist that required a documented incident report, the bread proofer running 5 degrees too cold, and gets worse in layers until you can't remember what normal felt like. The lavender honey tarts were the issue. The lavender extract that Cormorant used came from a small farm supplier in Vermont. The shipment that arrived that morning was wrong. Standard commercial lavender, not culinary grade, with a flavor profile approximately 3 times more aggressive than the recipe required. Gemma caught it when she opened the container. She had maybe 40 minutes before service to reconfigure the tart entirely or find an alternative. She found an alternative. It required using dried chamomile from the tea stock, reducing the honey differently, and recalibrating Bernard for a lower, slower bake. She pulled it off with 11 minutes to spare. Stuart walked through the pastry station at 6:45, looked at the finished tarts and said, to no one in particular, "Good. Glad we stayed consistent." He did not look at Gemma. In the booth near the kitchen window, Gemma's daughter Blythe looked up from her book. She had been watching the entire thing. The sprint, the substitution, the quiet recalibration of Bernard, the finished product. She wrote something in her notebook, closed it, and said nothing. Wyatt, restocking the cold station nearby, was also watching. He had been working at Cormorant for 9 days. In those 9 days, he had watched Gemma fix a dessert menu in 40 minutes, talk a VIP guest with a surprise nut allergy through 3 alternative options with genuine warmth, cover 2 staff absences simultaneously, and explain to a first-week prep cook how to properly build a millefeuille without making him feel small. He had also watched Stuart take credit for most of it in real time. Wyatt's expression when Stuart said, "Glad we stayed consistent," was not readable. He was very good at that. Blythe Hollis was 11 years old, 4 feet 10 inches tall, and already the most analytically alarming person Gemma knew. She showed up at the restaurant on Tuesdays and Thursdays after school while Gemma finished her shift. And she sat in the booth nearest the kitchen window with a notebook and whatever book she was currently reading, which ranged from behavioral economics texts borrowed from the public library to wildlife biology guides she'd ordered online with birthday money. Within 3 weeks of becoming a regular presence, she had acquired a small and devoted following among the kitchen staff. It started with Agnes, the prep cook, who was trying to decide whether to take a second job. Blythe had drawn a budget breakdown in her notebook margin and explained, with complete seriousness, that the second job would net Agnes roughly $40 a week after transportation and childcare costs, which meant she should negotiate a raise at the current one instead. Agnes had gotten the raise. After that, word traveled. "She's 11, Hector said once, watching the dishwasher ask Blythe something about a lease agreement. "She knows," Gemma said without looking up from her ganache. "She just doesn't believe that's a relevant limitation." The real escalation came the following week, and it began the way these things often do, with someone who felt cornered. A food writer had asked Stuart, in an email forwarded to the whole management team, whether the pastry program might be available for an exclusive feature. Stuart had replied that he would check on scheduling. He had not checked on scheduling. He had instead walked into the kitchen during afternoon prep, accused Gemma of communicating directly with press contacts without authorization, which she had not done, and informed her in front of Hector and Agnes and Wyatt and 2 members of the front-of-house staff who had come back for a coffee, that her attitude had been noted. The kitchen went very still. "My attitude," Gemma repeated. "You've been creating confusion about who leads the creative direction in this kitchen." Stuart straightened his toque. "That's a performance issue." "I design every dessert that goes on this menu," Gemma said quietly. "I prep this station, I manage the pastry staff. I sourced 3 emergency substitutions in the last 2 weeks alone. You execute my vision." The silence after that was a specific kind. The kind where everyone in the room knows the truth and no one has decided yet whether to say it out loud. In her booth, Blythe had gone very still with her book open and her eyes not moving across the page. "Furthermore," Stuart said, picking up speed in the way people do when they want to outrun their own argument, "I've had concerns from multiple staff members about the distraction your daughter creates in this environment." "Blythe doesn't go into the kitchen," Gemma said. "She sits in my dining room giving unsolicited advice to my staff on their personal and financial decisions, which is wildly inappropriate and frankly." Stuart paused, and something shifted in his expression. "It reflects on your judgment. An employee who can't manage her own household shouldn't be managing a pastry program." The cook nearest the walk-in freezer took a very slow step backward, as if removing himself from the blast radius. "Furthermore," Stuart continued, "the tart issue last Thursday was a quality control failure that originated from this station, and I've been asked by management to document." "The tart issue last Thursday," Gemma said, very carefully, "was a supplier error that I caught, substituted for, and corrected before service at no impact to the guest experience. I have the delivery log in my reformulation notes if you'd like to see them." Stuart's jaw tightened. "That's not the point." "Then what is the point?" "The point," he said, "is that this kitchen runs because of my direction, not because of your improvisation and your daughter's little notebook. Anyone could do what you do with the right instruction. You're not irreplaceable, Gemma." Something happened in the room then, not a sound, more of a collective exhale, like everyone breathing out at once. From the booth near the window, a chair scraped back. Blythe walked through the dining room, pushed through the kitchen door, which she was technically not allowed to do, and stood in the entrance with her notebook in one hand and a completely level expression. "Excuse me," she said to Stewart. Everyone looked at her. She was 4'10" and wearing a backpack with a cartoon octopus patch on it. "You can't be in here," Stewart started. "I'll be quick." She opened her notebook. "I've been sitting in that booth for 3 weeks. I've watched my mom fix 6 supplier problems, cover 4 staffing shortages, redesign 2 croissants for dietary restrictions the night of service, and keep this kitchen running on days when you weren't here. I've also watched you take credit for the tasting menu concept in an interview that I found online, which you got partially wrong, by the way. The pear component in the 7th course isn't inspired by northern French orchard traditions. Mom got the idea from a farmer's market in Hudson Valley on a trip we took in September." Stewart stared at her. "I'm 11, Blythe said, not irrelevant, just clarifying." She turned and walked back through the kitchen door. The silence that followed was extraordinary. Wyatt looked at his shoes for a long moment and then looked at Gemma, and the expression on his face was not the expression of a prep cook. Gemma did not sleep much that week. She told herself it was the Michelin pressure. She told Blythe she was fine. She told Bernard during a late Tuesday night when the restaurant was empty and she was doing inventory that she was absolutely certain she had made all the right choices and it was not bothering her, not at all. Bernard hissed. "I know," she said, "you don't have to say it." She heard footsteps in the dining room and turned to find Wyatt standing in the kitchen doorway, jacket on, apparently leaving for the night. "Kitchen's empty," she said. "I'm just finishing the count." "I know. Are you all right?" Prep cook question or human question? Human question. Gemma looked at the inventory sheet. "I'm fine." "You've said that 3 times in the last week to different people. None of them believed you either." She put the clipboard down. "You've been here 2.5 weeks. Long enough to notice things." He walked closer, stopped at a respectful distance. "Long enough to watch you rebuild a dessert course in 40 minutes and act like it was nothing. Long enough to watch that man take credit for your menu and see what your face does when he does it." Gemma said nothing. "You went quiet after what he said, about anyone being able to do your job." "He might be right," she said, and it came out quieter than she'd intended, which is the thing about saying the things you've been carrying. They always sound smaller and larger at the same time when they finally come out. "He's not right," Wyatt said. "You can't know that. You've been here 2 weeks. I've been watching you for 2 weeks. He paused. "You talked a guest through a full allergy scare without making her feel scared. You trained Hector on chocolate tempering in 20 minutes and built his confidence at the same time. You covered the bread station on a Tuesday and your own station simultaneously and didn't drop one thing." He looked at her directly, and before any of that you apologized to an oven. Gemma laughed despite herself, a short laugh, tired but genuine. "Bernard had it coming," she said. "Bernard was definitely being difficult," Wyatt agreed. "I've noticed." For a moment they stood there in the empty kitchen, with the low hum of the refrigeration units and Bernard ticking in the corner. "My daughter thinks I can do anything," Gemma said finally. "Most days I let her believe it because she's 11 and I don't want her to know how often I'm making it up as I go." "You're not making it up," Wyatt said. "Making it up implies you don't actually know what you're doing. You know exactly what you're doing. You've just been told for long enough that it doesn't count that some part of you started listening." Gemma looked at him, the new prep cook with the expensive haircut and the hands that didn't entirely make sense for someone who'd come in off a hospitality staffing app. "Who are you?" she said. "Just somebody who pays attention," he said, and before she could push further he nodded at Bernard. "Good night, chef. You too, Bernard." The oven did not hiss, which was, Gemma thought, basically an endorsement. The investor walked in 2 days later. He arrived in a dark coat and introduced himself to Stewart as Gerard Holt of Pinnacle Hospitality Group. Gemma knew about the acquisition talks the way employees learn about these things. Through overheard logistics, an unusual number of suits in the dining room on a Tuesday lunch. She hadn't been in the room for any of it. But the kitchen pass had very good acoustics. "The question is whether the culinary backbone is solid," Holt was saying. If key talent is concentrated in one person, that's a structural risk. The team here is exceptional, Stewart said, well-trained across the board. Your pastry program specifically, the press has been strong. Who's driving that? A pause. It's a collaborative effort, Stewart said. I oversee creative direction, but execution is distributed. So the pastry lead, your sous chef, is she essential or replaceable? Gemma stopped moving. In any professional kitchen, Stewart said, with the right instruction and the right framework, positions can be filled. She's talented, but she's not the architecture. She's one component. Gemma set down the piping bag she was holding. She walked to the far end of the pastry station. She stood with her back to the pass and breathed slowly. Then she did something she had not done since Blythe was a toddler. She cried very quietly in front of Bernard. I know, she whispered. Don't. Bernard made a soft, low sound from the vent, not a hiss, something gentler. She wiped her face with her sleeve. She was a professional. She was 31 years old. She was... Gemma. She turned. Wyatt was standing at the kitchen entrance, and something about his posture was different. He was not holding any prep materials. He was not in his work stance. He was standing the way someone stands when they are about to say something they have been deciding whether to say for a long time. I need to tell you something, he said. Did you hear that conversation? Yes. He said I was replaceable. He was wrong, and he was lying because he knows exactly how essential you are. That's why he's been taking credit for your work for 6 years. Wyatt walked closer, and I know that because I've been watching this restaurant for considerably longer than 2.5 weeks. Gemma frowned. What does that mean? My name is Wyatt Ashmore, he said. I'm the majority owner of the Ashmore Group. We own 11 restaurants. Cormorant has been in our portfolio for 4 years, and I came in undercover because the performance reports weren't matching what I was hearing from inside the kitchen. The room did not spin. Gemma was grateful for that. The prep coat, she said. Convincing, I hope. Your knife grip was wrong for someone with experience. He almost smiled. I know, I improved over the 2 weeks. Gemma sat down on a stool. You own this restaurant? Yes. And Stewart is finished here. I have enough documentation and now direct observation. I should have done this sooner. I'm sorry that I didn't. He paused. I'm also sorry you had to hear what Holt said. I was testing him. His group is not going to be acquiring anything because his assessment of this kitchen is fundamentally wrong, and I have no interest in working with someone who would call you replaceable with a straight face. Gemma looked at him, the billionaire who had been arguing politely with Bernard about temperature calibration for 2 weeks. You told Bernard good night, she said. Bernard is good company. He's an oven. He's got a lot of personality. She laughed. A real one this time, full and surprised and a little helpless, and pressed her hand over her mouth. Wyatt called everyone into the dining room at 3 in the afternoon, the between-service hour when the kitchen staff ate and the front-of-house reset. He stood in the center of the room without a toque, without a prep jacket. My name is Wyatt Ashmore, he said. I own Cormorant. I've been working as a prep cook for the last 3 weeks, because I wanted to understand what this kitchen actually does without anyone adjusting their behavior for my benefit. The dishwasher stopped drying a glass. Hector sat down. What I found, Wyatt continued, is a pastry program that is among the most technically sound and creatively consistent I've seen in 20 years of this industry. I found a sous chef who has been absorbing the instability of this kitchen for years without recognition, credit, or adequate compensation. He looked at Stewart, who had gone a specific shade of pale. And I found a head chef who has been operating under the significant misimpression that taking credit for someone else's work is a sustainable management strategy. Stewart opened his mouth. You're terminated effective immediately, Wyatt said simply. HR will contact you this week. You can collect your personal items now. Stewart left. He said nothing. The kitchen door swung behind him and the room exhaled all at once. Agnes raised her hand. Can I say something? Wyatt nodded. Agnes turned to Gemma. 2 years ago, my daughter got sick, needed a procedure our insurance wouldn't cover. I didn't tell anyone because I was embarrassed. She paused. Gemma found out somehow, I still don't know how, and she showed up at my station the next morning with 3 phone numbers. A patient advocacy group, an insurance specialist she knew personally, and a woman at a local nonprofit who arranged emergency medical funds. She'd spent her entire lunch break on it. Agnes looked at Gemma directly. "I've never said thank you properly." Gemma shook her head. "Agnes, you don't have to." "Hector next," Agnes said. Hector sat up straight. "When I started here, I almost quit in the second week because I was convinced I wasn't good enough." Gemma spent 45 minutes on a Saturday morning. Her day off, she was just here finishing inventory, going over every technique I'd been struggling with, and not once made me feel like I was behind, she said. "The only difference between a cook who stays and a cook who goes is whether someone took the time." I stayed. In her booth near the window, Blythe wrote something in her notebook. It kept going. Phil, the dishwasher who had worked at Cormorant longer than anyone, talked about Gemma advocating for kitchen staff pay parity in a management meeting the previous spring. A meeting Gemma hadn't known anyone else knew about. The pastry trainee talked about a recipe Gemma had written out by hand for her to keep. The sommelier talked about the night Gemma had stayed late to help reset for a private event. No overtime, because they were short-staffed and she knew what it meant for the team. Gemma stood in the middle of the dining room with her hands folded in front of her and her eyes bright, her posture doing the specific work of someone trying very hard to hold it together in front of their entire professional community. Blythe got up from the booth and walked over and put her hand in her mother's. "I have something too," Blythe said in her notebook voice, the clear, precise one she used when citing a source. "I've been watching my mom run this pastry program since I was 8 years old. I used to think I was the one who was good at figuring things out. Patterns, numbers, how things connect." She looked at Gemma. "But everything I know about reading a situation, about solving a problem and not making it about yourself, about staying calm when something breaks, I learned it from you. Every single bit of it." Her voice didn't waver, but her hand tightened in Gemma's. "So I want you to know that I'm not the smart one. I'm just the one who paid attention, and I learned from the best." Gemma made a sound she would later describe to no one as a very professional and dignified response. Then she cried, properly, in front of everyone, with Blythe's hand in hers and the whole Cormorant kitchen watching, and it was nothing like the quiet cry she'd done behind Bernard, and she didn't care at all. Wyatt made 2 more announcements. The first was that Gemma would be promoted to executive chef of Cormorant, with full creative credit and a compensation package that reflected 6 years of documented contribution. The second was that the Ashmore Group was establishing a culinary scholarship for young people demonstrating exceptional aptitude in food science or hospitality management. The inaugural recipient pending her acceptance was Blythe Hollis, who would receive full funding for a specialized STEM culinary program beginning in the fall, with mentorship access through the Ashmore network. Blythe looked at the letter Wyatt handed her, then at her mother, then at the letter again. "I would like to accept," she said formally. Gemma laughed and gathered her in. The proposal happened 3 weeks later during the soft reopening tasting night. It was Gemma's first full menu as executive chef, and everything had gone beautifully right up until the moment she turned from the plating station with a tray of lavender honey tarts, the real ones, from the real Vermont supplier, finally, and walked directly into Wyatt, who was coming around the corner of the pass. The tray went sideways, the tarts went sideways. 1 landed on Wyatt's left shoe, 2 made it to the floor, 1 improbably landed upright on the corner of the prep table, which felt like the universe being diplomatic. The kitchen froze. Gemma looked at the tarts on the floor. She looked at Wyatt's shoe. "I cannot believe I just did that." "In fairness," Wyatt said, "I came around the corner fast." "Those were for the 4 top in the corner." "I know." He crouched down and picked up the tart from the floor. He put it on the tray. He stayed crouched, and then he reached into his jacket pocket. Not a chef's jacket, just a regular jacket, from a person who owned 11 restaurants and had apparently been carrying something in it, and he opened a small box. Gemma stared at him. "I know this is the reopening night," he said. "I know there's a 4 top waiting and the tarts need to be remade, and Bernard is probably overheating slightly based on the sound he's been making for the last 20 minutes. Bernard made a pointed click from the corner. "I also know," Wyatt continued, "that I spent 3 weeks in this kitchen pretending to be something I wasn't, and somehow that was the most honest I've been in years. I know that you named an oven. I know that your daughter could out-argue most of my board members. And I know that you make things beautiful and then hand the credit to someone else, and I want to spend a very long time making sure that stops." He looked at her. "Will you marry me, Gemma?" Hector made a strangled sound from the other side of the kitchen. Agnes covered her mouth. Blythe in her booth looked up from her notebook, set down her pen, and turned fully toward the kitchen window. Gemma looked at the man crouching in her kitchen with a ring box and lavender tart crumbs on his shoes. She thought about the steam hitting her in the face on a Wednesday morning. About the first time she'd noticed him watching from the cold station. About the night he'd stood in the empty kitchen and said, "You know exactly what you're doing." "Yes," she said, "obviously yes, but you're helping me remake those tarts." The kitchen exploded. Hector actually shouted. Agnes grabbed Phil's arm. Someone from the front of house heard the noise and pushed through to see what happened. And within 4 minutes the dining room knew, and within another 2 the foretop in the corner was applauding without entirely knowing why, but feeling that it was clearly warranted. Bernard in his corner made a deep and resonant sound that in any other appliance would have been concerning, but from him read unmistakably as approval. 6 months later, the dining room of Cormorant was not a dining room. It was draped in cream linen and pale gold lights, 40 chairs arranged in a semicircle around the kitchen pass, which had been transformed into something resembling an altar by Agnes and Blythe, working together for 2 weekends. Bernard had a bow. It was a wide satin bow, champagne-colored, tied around his handle by Blythe herself, and a small card attached that read, "Honorary Officiant. Do not adjust temperature." The kitchen staff filled the front rows. Hector was already emotional. Phil held a handkerchief. Agnes had warned everyone she was going to cry and was proving accurate. Wyatt stood at the pass in a dark suit with the particular expression of a man who had faced hostile acquisition negotiations and high-stakes industry reviews and found this considerably more nerve-wracking than either. The music started. Gemma appeared at the dining room entrance in a dress that was simple and white and exactly right, and she was walking alone because she had wanted to. And Blythe was already standing at the front with a small bouquet that matched her mother's, having declared that she preferred to be waiting at the finish line rather than walking alongside it. As Gemma moved down the aisle past Hector, past Agnes, past Phil already blowing his nose, she reached Bernard. She stopped. She looked at the bow. She looked at the card. She turned to find Blythe watching her with a look that was half amusement and half something softer. Gemma reached out and touched the handle lightly. "All right," she said, quiet enough that only Bernard could hear. "You knew before I did. You don't have to look so smug about it." The oven was for once completely silent. She smiled and kept walking. At the pass, she took Wyatt's hands, and the officiant said something beautiful that she later could not recall word for word because she was looking at his face, and Blythe was looking at both of them. And behind her the kitchen staff of Cormorant were crying or laughing or both. When it was done, when they had kissed and turned and the room erupted, Blythe stepped forward and tucked herself under Gemma's free arm. "I knew," she said in her best citation voice. "I know you knew," Gemma said. "Before you did. Yes, you've mentioned. I'm going to mention it again. I assumed." Gemma laughed, the deep, unguarded kind she saved for moments too full to contain, and held her daughter and her husband and looked across the restaurant she had built through 6 years of early mornings and improvised solutions and quiet expertise that had gone unclaimed for too long. She was not the invisible one, she never had been. It had just taken a misdelivered lavender shipment, a billionaire in a borrowed prep coat, an 11-year-old with a notebook, and one extraordinarily opinionated oven to make her finally believe it.